You may have heard a couple of days ago that Yoshua Bengio's name was on a paper entitled Consciousness and Artificial Intelligence, Insights from the Science of Consciousness. And I want to highlight a couple of things about this paper that you may not have heard. So the paper is long and detailed and goes into, it is called theory heavy for a good reason, right? So it goes into a lot of the recent theory with respect to consciousness, but that's not what I want to talk about. The most interesting thing about this paper is what is implied. And what is implied is the clear intent behind the paper, and especially the intent involved in having someone like Bengio associated with the paper. Because Butlin and Long are figures that you may not have heard of, but Bengio is one that you're likely to have heard of, and his name being on the paper does something slightly different with respect to its potential impact. And so here it is. What I want to propose is that they are trying to set a research agenda, and they are helping to push the field to nudge it along in a particular direction, which is very interesting, and I think I'm optimistic about this. I think it's going to be very productive for us, because what they argue specifically, and they do this in going through a lot of different theories, and I'm not worried about the specific details of any one theory, because 10, 20 years from now, we're probably going to change these things radically. So the actual details may not matter quite as much as the fact that they're saying, look, if you take a survey of all of the different ways that we have of dealing with what consciousness is in philosophy of mind right now, then the conclusion is that we can instrumentalize this. We can turn it into something that is possible to do with current AI technology, where they say, we think this is possible using the current technologies in AI, that there are no barriers to being able to do this. Well, that's really interesting. That basically tells them, okay, look, here, for those of you who are in the field, this is possible right now, and here are the things that you need to do it. And so that helps to get the ball rolling and say, if you really want consciousness, and here are all the different indicators. That's one of the key words from the paper. So these are all of the different indicators that tell us when something is conscious. Whether that's actually the case or not, who knows? I'm not even sure that it's all that terribly important, ironically, even though that's what everybody's going to be thinking about. But what matters with this is that this is going to elicit potentially a behavioral change in terms of what it is that these AI agents actually do. And one of the things, for instance, is recurrence in terms of being able to ruminate on things. And we've seen sort of hints of this with chain of thought reasoning, where, recently, for instance, with the MMLU. So this is one of the popular benchmarks. One of the problems with the MMLU is that the way that tends to be graded and used as a benchmark is that you have to give your answer first. In other words, the very first character is, A, B, C, or D, that sort of thing, in terms of multiple choice answer to the test. The problem is that LLMs are not great at doing that. And to be perfectly frank, people, if they are not given the opportunity to really think through what's going on and reflect upon their possible answers, they're not necessarily going to be very good at it either. And so your first instinct, your first impulse to answer SAT questions or something on the GRE or, what have you, it may not be right. You're probably going to get better if you think about it for a little while. And that's exactly what people have found, and researchers have found this as well, with the MMLU, for instance, proposing that ChatGPT-4 can improve by up to 3% by doing this. Okay, so goodness to be had there, but that speaks to the question of recurrence. In other words, having the AI reflect on what it is that it's actually doing and creating a kind of loop of thought that will help to create more of an environment, more of an awareness of what it's actually thinking, why it might be thinking it, whether it's a good idea or not. In other words, you have a thought and then you kind of test that against your environment. You test that against, and when I say environment, we're not just talking physical environment. We're talking about the thought environment, the idea in the environment in which that idea would live. And so you test that idea against, is this a good solution to the problem? And when I say test it, what I really mean is you juxtapose the two together. You put them both in your mind at the same time and say, does that feel right? Is that the sort of thing that feels like it might be a good solution to the question? And the reason this works is because for us especially, we naturally form those associations when we put two things next to each other. And so to consider an idea for us oftentimes just means to say, let us have that in mind at the same time that I have the environment of the problem in mind. And those associations are going to form naturally and in the background for us. We don't have to put a lot of conscious effort into actually forming them. And so that's the kind of thing I think that we need to be pushing towards. And it seems like Yoshua and his colleagues, and I should say Butlin and Long, right, because they are the driving forces of this paper. But people are more likely to recognize Bengio's name. That's why I was excited to see this, that you have people that are actually pushing for this. Same thing happened with the Sparks of AGI paper with Bubeck a number of months ago. This is exciting because you have people in the field who are renowned and are willing to attach their name to something and say, hey, by the way, knock knock, wake up, this is something that we can do. So I think that's pretty exciting, and it may not be something that you've noticed about the paper so far.